My name is Serenity. I'm 33 years old, a marketing director living in Chicago. I used to think I had it all: a solid career, a stable marriage, a home with the man I loved. But that night, in the middle of the crowded O'Hare airport, when my suitcase was torn open and my belongings were thrown across the freezing floor, Ryan, my husband, stood on the other side with his group of close friends, laughing and yelling, "She wanted independence, right? Let's see how she handles it with no one around." What would you do if the person you loved most turned your pain into a public spectacle? Leave a comment if you've ever been abandoned when you needed someone the most. Hit like if you believe resilience can pull someone back from the edge. And don't forget to subscribe, because what happened after that night, no one could have seen coming. My name is Serenity. I'm 33 years old, a marketing director living in Chicago. We lived in a 3-story red brick house in Lincoln Park, where the trees were always neatly trimmed, every window had blooming flowers in the summer, and people still greeted each other as they passed by. Every morning, I made coffee using the machine Ryan had picked out for our 3rd wedding anniversary. Every night, I went to sleep in the satin-sheeted bed I had custom ordered. My mom once said, "You're lucky, Serenity. A man like Ryan isn't easy to find." And she was right. From the outside looking in, we were the perfect couple. I worked in brand strategy for a nationwide food company, while Ryan was a software engineer at a cybersecurity firm. He was tall, well-dressed, and always well-liked. At events, he'd always place his hand behind my back and introduce me with pride. "This is my wife, Serenity, the smartest person I know." I used to think I was truly happy. We met at a professional conference in New York. I was fumbling with my laptop when he walked over and asked gently, "Need a hand?" I looked up and saw a warm smile and sharp, attentive eyes. Ryan wasn't overly talkative, but he knew how to listen. In the early days, he made me feel seen, cherished, and safe. It didn't take long for us to fall in love and get married. The house in Chicago was our shared dream. I hung vintage prints I'd found at weekend art markets, and he redesigned my home office with built-in bookshelves, antique-style reading lamps, and a Persian rug he ordered online from Turkey. But after 3.5 years of marriage, I started to feel something shift. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. It was just different. He began coming home late, often with excuses like extra work or team meetings outside. When I'd ask, "Can we have dinner together tonight?" he'd usually say, "Not sure. Might swing by Brandon's for a bit." Brandon was Ryan's best friend from college, someone I'd never really connected with. I once suggested inviting his group over for dinner. He shut it down. "They don't really vibe with you. You'd just be bored." Bored? I was a woman who could speak confidently in front of 500 people and had led a marketing campaign worth $2 million. But in my husband's eyes, I didn't fit in with his beer and laugh crowd. So I started observing more quietly. Some days he came home smelling like cigarettes. Ryan hated cigarettes, I knew that for a fact. He'd said so when we first dated. When I asked, he said, "A buddy smokes. Must have rubbed off." When I pushed, he snapped, "You're always suspicious. Controlling. It's exhausting." I stopped pushing. One evening, I left my phone on the dining table. When I returned, I saw Ryan scrolling through it, fingers moving quickly like he was searching for something. "What are you doing?" I asked. He grinned. "Just checking your schedule. Your boss texted." Strange. My boss always sent meeting times via email, never text. I began staying up later, partly for work, partly because I was afraid of the silence at night. I'd sit in my home office, staring at the laptop screen, listening to the wind rush through the window, feeling completely hollow. We barely spoke anymore. Some nights, he came home like a stranger, renting a room, nodding hello and heading straight upstairs. I'd only catch a glimpse of his shoulders, his back, which no longer felt familiar. When I suggested we take a weekend trip to reconnect, he shrugged. "That's the weekend of my college reunion. Can't miss that." I nodded, trying to smile. "Maybe I'll come along?" He paused. "I don't think that's a good idea. The guys, they talk a lot of nonsense." That sentence was a quiet stab, not sharp enough to bleed, but deep enough to ache. Why did my husband feel like I didn't belong with his friends? Or was he just hiding something? I began to feel like I was living with a stranger. The man who used to hold my hand crossing the street now stared at his phone beside me. The one who once remembered how I liked my coffee no longer knew if I took it with cream. One weekend evening, I was reading in the kitchen when loud laughter echoed from downstairs. Ryan's friends had dropped by unannounced. He didn't check with me, didn't ask if it was okay. I walked out, and before I could even say anything, one of them nudged Ryan and laughed. "Hey, your wife still lives here?" Ryan laughed along and changed the subject. I couldn't laugh. I stood there, surrounded by chatter and clinking glasses, feeling like a ghost in my own home. I had once been the woman he cherished. Now I was just a shadow. And I didn't even know where I went wrong. Or maybe, I just believed too strongly that love alone was enough to make someone stay. That year's birthday party was supposed to be a turning point. I told myself this would be a chance to reconnect, to remind us both why we chose marriage in the first place. But what waited for me behind the doors of that sports bar on the outskirts of Chicago was a scar I wouldn't forget for a long time. Ryan wanted to celebrate his 35th birthday with his close group of friends at a bar with a backyard patio. He said it would be low-key, just a few friends, some food, a couple of drinks. I agreed to go, even though I was drained from a full week of back-to-back meetings. I picked a simple yet elegant dress. I didn't want to be the outsider anymore. But from the moment I walked in, something felt off. There were over a dozen people, mostly men, a few girlfriends dressed to the nines, laughing loudly and clinking glasses. Ryan pulled out a chair for me in the middle of the table, and one of the guys let out a whistle. Wow, I thought she was a legend. Didn't know she was real. Everyone burst into laughter. I gave a tight smile, unsure how to respond. Ryan said nothing. Just poured another beer. I tried to join the conversation, asked a few people about the college memories they brought up, but every word I said seemed to vanish into the air. They kept joking, using inside lingo I couldn't follow, with abrupt laughter and smirks. Ryan clinked glasses, nodded along, occasionally glancing at me to ask, "You okay?" His eyes still glued to the TV showing a game. I sat there, surrounded by noise, shouts, crashing glasses, thumping music, wondering if I had wandered into a different world where I simply didn't belong. Around 10 p.m., I leaned over and whispered, "Can we head home soon? I'm exhausted." He tilted his head toward me, eyes glazed from alcohol. "It's barely even started and you're tired already." I kept my voice gentle. "I have an early presentation tomorrow. You can stay, I just want to get a ride home." One of Ryan's friends jumped in, mocking, "Geez, Ryan, she's got you on that tight of a leash?" The group burst into laughter. Ryan smirked and said, "See? Being the perfect husband isn't always a walk in the park." Then he tilted his head back and downed his beer. I stood up, my chest tightening like someone was squeezing my heart. "Do you want me to stay or leave? Just say it." He stood too, his voice sharp. "You always blow everything out of proportion. That's why my friends don't like you." I froze. They don't like me, or they don't like that I'm around to see who you really are. That lit a match. We both left the table and stormed out to the parking lot. The December night air in Chicago was bitter cold, wind howling through my thin coat. Only a few cars were scattered across the lot, yellow lights casting a hazy glow through fogged-up windows. "I don't need you here if you're just going to make me look bad," Ryan snapped. "I didn't make anyone look bad," I said, my hands trembling. I couldn't tell if it was from anger or the cold. "I'm your wife." I thought that meant I had a right to show up. "Yeah, and you always think you have the right to stick your nose into everything," he barked. "You think you're smarter than everyone. Always have to say something. Always have to be in control." I stepped back, something inside me breaking before I could catch it. "So if I left, would that make it easier for you to breathe?" He didn't answer. Just turned away and tossed back. "Stay out here and think about it." Then he got in the car where his friends were already waiting. The door slammed shut. Laughter erupted again from inside. The engine roared to life. I shouted, "Ryan!" The car reversed and peeled out of the lot, disappearing down the dark road leading to the highway. I stood frozen in the cold night. No warm coat. No wallet. No phone, just a small purse I'd left in the car when I stepped out. I sat on the curb, my breath shaky, my hands clenched white. I had been left behind. No explanation, no apology, no hint of regret. My phone had only a sliver of battery left. It died as I tried to call a ride. No wallet meant I couldn't pay. No car meant I had no way home. And with no one around, I didn't even know where to go. I looked around. No one. Not a soul in sight. The street lights flickered. The air was cold and still, just like my heart in that moment. I curled up, resting my head on my knees, breath quivering. I couldn't understand what had just happened. The man I had once loved, trusted enough to marry, with whom I'd shared every little detail of life, had just stepped on the gas and left me behind like I never existed. In the freezing air and dim glow of a lonely road in the Chicago suburbs, I realized if I didn't get up now, no one was coming to save me. I don't know how long I stood there after Ryan's car vanished. My legs were numb, fingers stiff from the cold, and my mind felt like it had been wiped blank. I wandered to the side of the bar, hoping to find anyone, but it was shut tight. No one around except a few drunk strangers swaying across the street. I started walking. No goal. No direction. Every step felt heavier, more painful as the cold seeped through my thin clothes. I tried to find a bus stop, hoping I could catch a ride back to downtown Chicago. But the last bus had left over an hour ago. My phone had just a bit of power left, enough for one last call. I dialed Ryan. A cold voice recording answered. "The number you have dialed is not accepting calls." I called again. Rejected. I tried Pete, his closest friend. Then Marco. Then Ethan, his best man at our wedding. No one answered. I texted. "I've been left. I don't have my wallet. No car. Somewhere near Elmwood Park." The message showed as sent. No one replied. In that moment, I didn't just feel abandoned. I felt erased. That night, I found a small, empty train station. No electricity. No benches. Just scraps of paper rustling under the wind. I curled up on a concrete slab, clutching my small purse to my chest and closed my eyes, dazed. The wind howled through the gaps in the windows. The distant rumble of passing trains echoed like the lonely heartbeat of a city that didn't care who had fallen. My back ached from the cold. My wrists stung from the wind. A man passed by, squinting at me, then muttered, "Another runaway." He let out a dry laugh and walked on. The next morning, I was jolted awake by a sharp pain in my shoulder. Someone had bumped into me. A scruffy man with tangled hair and a hard glare stood over me. "This is my spot. Find somewhere else." I got up and headed toward a nearby park. I found a stone bench covered in frost and sat down, pulling out my phone only to find it completely dead. No way to call a ride. No map. No contact. That afternoon I sat silently in front of an old church with a chipped statue of the Virgin Mary. I didn't pray. I didn't think I had enough faith left. I just needed a roof. A cup of tea. A single person to ask if I was okay. And then, she appeared. She didn't say anything at first. Just quietly placed a bag of bread and a bottle of water beside me. I looked up. Her eyes were kind, her voice raspy but warm. "It's cold, dear. You should come inside." I nodded in thanks. My lips were too dry to speak. She reached out a hand to help me up. "What's your name?" she asked as we walked down a stone hallway. "Serenity," I whispered. "Your parents gave you a beautiful name." "Peaceful," she smiled. "I'm Martha. Almost 70 now. This church. It's been my home for over 30 years. She led me into a small room behind the chapel. Just a single wooden bed, a little table, a crooked picture of Christ, and a few blankets. Nothing fancy. But to me it felt like heaven. "No one should have to sleep outside in the cold," she said as she poured a cup of hot tea. "You don't have to say anything unless you're ready. But if you need someone to listen, I've still got 2 good ears." I gripped the warm mug tightly, not even realizing I was crying. I didn't talk much that day. I just slept. A deep, restless sleep filled with jerks and starts like even my body didn't believe it was safe. Every gust of wind, every creak, every chime from the chapel bell made me flinch, afraid the nightmare would restart. That night, after I finished a bowl of warm soup Martha made, I finally whispered, "My husband left me." No reason. No explanation. She didn't press. Just sat beside me, gently resting her hand on mine. When people are hurting, they often forget who they are. But you know what, sweetheart? Everyone is born with a name. No one has the right to take that from you. I looked at her, tears rising again. I had once been a woman with a title, a strong voice, a seat right beside the CEO every week. Now I was sitting in a small room behind a church, being fed soup by a 70-year-old woman, feeling so small I didn't even dare cry out loud. That night, curled up under a thin lavender-scented blanket, I remembered the armchair in our living room where I used to read while Ryan watched TV. I remembered the way he used to call my name. I remembered the way he once looked at me with love. Once. But in that cold little stone room, I saw a different kind of gaze, a gaze from a stranger who still reached out when I had completely fallen apart. And I suddenly understood. Some hands, even trembling ones, can still be warm enough to hold a shattered heart together. I woke up on Tuesday morning in that tiny room behind the church, faint sunlight streaming through the wooden window frame and casting pale light on the cold white wall. Martha was in the kitchen cooking breakfast, the gentle smell of toasted bread mixing with the familiar scent of mint tea. I still wasn't used to this kind of peace. A peace that came not from winning, but from having nothing left to lose. I sat on the wooden chair, holding the cup of tea she'd just poured. Her voice was low but steady. You can't stay here forever, Serenity. This church doesn't have enough to keep anyone for long. But I believe you know what you need to do. I looked at her. No resentment. No pressure. Just a quiet sentence, yet it stayed with me the entire day. I had waited, hoping someone would call, send a text to apologize, come pick me up. But no one did. Not a single person. That night, I sat on the church steps watching people pass by, and asked myself, if I don't stand up, who's going to do it for me? The next morning, I started looking for work. I borrowed Martha's old phone and connected to the free Wi-Fi at the public library. I signed up for a few gig work apps. Everything felt unfamiliar. I didn't know how to fill out employment forms, didn't understand the hourly wage systems. I used to approve six-figure ad contracts, yet my hands shook as I filled out an application to work as a temporary barista at a small cafe in the Edgewater area. 3 days later, I got my first job, working behind the counter, pouring coffee, wiping down tables. At first, my body resisted everything. My hands blistered from carrying hot trays, my feet swollen from standing 8 hours a day, my back ached after rush hour. One day, I spilled coffee on a customer's dress and got scolded by the manager right on the spot. Another day, a customer yelled at me just for writing the wrong name on their cup. But I didn't give up. At night, I returned to a temporary room at a women's shelter Martha had told me about. The space was small but clean and safe. I saved every tip, every dollar little by little, until I could finally afford an old phone of my own. By the second month, I got a part-time job as a stock associate at a big grocery store near the train station. The work involved unloading deliveries, counting inventory, and entering orders into the system. Skills I once thought I'd never need were now the only things keeping me going. I learned how to read product codes, check expiration dates, stack cartons neatly so they wouldn't block walkways. Sometimes, in the freezing morning air, sweat soaking through the back of my shirt, I'd look around and barely believe this was my life. And then I met Jake. He was the store's delivery guy, thin, scruffy hair falling into his eyes, a faint scar still visible on his wrist. I remember the first time he talked to me, his voice hoarse from smoking. "You knew? You look too clean. Bet you've never carried a few £100 of inventory." I gave a small smile. "I haven't. But I'm learning." Jake nodded and handed me a pair of thicker gloves. "Those flimsy ones will just tear up your hands. Use these. Old, but they hold up." From that day on, Jake would swing by the warehouse a few times daily, sometimes helping me move boxes, sometimes showing me faster ways to input inventory data. He never asked about my past, and I never asked about the faded tattoos on his arms. We worked like silent teammates, sharing sandwiches during breaks, trading the occasional offhand comment just enough to feel less alone. One rainy afternoon, as we sat under the metal awning behind the store, Jake finally opened up. "I used to be deep into drugs and booze," he said. "Got kicked out at 22. Friends cut me off. I lived on the streets for over 3 years. I didn't say anything. Just listened to the sound of rain tapping on the old roof. Jake went on. Some old lady at the Southwest Church gave me a bowl of hot soup just when I was thinking about ending it all. She didn't say much, just asked if I wanted a place to sleep for one night. I nodded, and the next morning, she took me to a rehab center. 4 years now. I haven't touched a thing. I turned to look at him. Jake wasn't searching for pity. His eyes were calm, firm, like someone who had learned to carry the past without letting it lead the way. Sounds familiar, I said softly. Jake smiled. You met a church lady too, huh? I nodded, and told him about Martha. People like that. Rare, Jake said. People like you. Even rarer. Someone who had everything and still chose to start over. I didn't respond. I just looked at my hands. The same hands that used to type emails in a climate-controlled office were now covered in fresh calluses. And in that moment, surrounded by dust, cold air, and the roar of container trucks nearby, I didn't feel like the woman left behind on a freezing night anymore. That morning began like any other. I woke up in the small rented room near the church, a place I had moved into a few weeks earlier with money from my warehouse and cafe shifts. I picked up my phone to check the work schedule app when a news alert flashed on the screen. The headline blinked. Lead engineer Ryan Davis suspended amid internal corruption allegations. I froze, my finger still on the screen. Name, title, company, there was no mistake. It was Ryan. The same man who walked out of my life without a backward glance. I opened the article. The image was familiar. The main lobby of the tech firm where Ryan worked, with an old photo of him, still the same confident face, charcoal gray dress shirt pressed smooth, smiling for the camera. But the words underneath painted a different picture. Following an internal audit at Intech Cybersystems, Mr. Ryan Davis has been suspended pending allegations of contract fund manipulation and misappropriation of transferred assets. I collapsed onto the edge of the bed, heart pounding. A part of me didn't want to believe it. Ryan, the man who meticulously mapped out every step of his career, who obsessed over tax records caught in fraud. I kept reading. The numbers appeared: fake contracts, shell companies, funds routed through 3 subsidiary branches before returning to his personal account. An anonymous source confirmed he had been under investigation 3 months, and the company had forwarded the case to financial authorities. 3 months ago, that was when Ryan started growing distant. I stared at the screen. Suddenly, things clicked in ways I'd never considered before. The late nights at work. The messages he deleted without explanation. The way he changed, treating me like a burden, standing in the way of something he couldn't control. Had I really been living next to a man spiraling into darkness, completely unaware? Anger surged inside me, but so did something else. Pain. Pain from trusting someone so deeply I gave up my career for him. I had once turned down a director position on the West Coast because Ryan didn't want to move somewhere too sunny and far from friends. I had signed over full control of my finances. Pooled every cent into a joint account, one he never gave me the password to. Back then I thought it was love. Thought it meant we shared everything. Now I knew it was control. I pulled my thin jacket tighter and stepped outside, letting the cold wind hit my face. I needed to stay awake. I walked to my usual cafe and ordered an espresso like I did every day. As I was wiping down the counter, Jake walked in, hands still tucked into the pockets of his worn-out hoodie, a faded beanie pulled low over his head. He looked at me, frowning. You look like someone just dragged you out of a bad dream this morning. I handed him my phone. Jake went quiet for a few seconds, then let out a low whistle. Oh, it's him. You okay? I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window, where buses rushed by, people hurried to work, and life simply moved on. Honestly, I feel relieved, I said. Turns out, I wasn't so awful that I deserved to be left behind. He was just someone running from himself. Jake nodded. Exactly. And now you're not standing behind him anymore. You're standing on your own. I turned to him and smiled. Not a perfect smile, but a real one. I'm not going back. No matter what happens, I won't take a step backward. I wasn't born to be someone's shadow. Jake chuckled. I know. But hey, if you ever need someone to haul boxes for you, just call. I laughed out loud. My laughter wasn't held back. That night, I sat in my room and opened up an old laptop I had picked up from a second-hand shop. I dug through my old professional files, pulled up past achievements, and reopened the projects I once led at my old firm. I created a new email account. I started building my profile from scratch. I didn't think of Ryan as a loss anymore. Now he was just the reason I would prove that people can get back up even when they've been shoved all the way down. I knew I couldn't erase what had already happened. But I could write what was coming next. The page was mine. No one was taking the pen out of my hand again. I still remember that morning clearly. A gentle breeze slipped through the cafe window while I was busy adjusting a layout for an organic shampoo campaign I had volunteered to help a local shop design. A woman walked up to my table, holding a latte and a slim laptop, offering a soft smile. "You're Serenity, right? I'm Hannah from Clover Creative. Mind if I sit?" I looked up, confused. Clover Creative was a rising media startup on the north side of Chicago, rumored in marketing circles as the next dark horse in wellness and clean food branding. Hannah placed her laptop down and got straight to the point. "I read one of your designs 3 years ago at a conference in Denver. I still have that presentation saved. This morning when I saw your proposal for this cafe on Instagram, I recognized your touch instantly. And honestly, I'd really love to invite you to collaborate." I froze for a moment. After months of doing manual work, taking slow steps to rebuild trust, that invitation felt like a sudden beam of light cutting through an old memory I'd buried deep. "Are you sure?" I asked quietly. "I'm not really the person you knew through that design anymore." Hannah looked right at me, without hesitation. "Talent doesn't disappear. It just sleeps. I'm not looking for someone perfect. I'm looking for someone who got back up. And I think that's you." A few weeks later, I officially accepted the role of creative director for a new branch campaign at Clover focused on brand development for a line of natural wellness products. The office was small, the team just about 10 people, but every single one was full of energy and mutual respect. I was called by my name, not by who I was married to. My ideas were heard, not edited just because they didn't fit your husband's image. I stayed up late not to cook for some office drinking party, but to sketch out creative plans I was proud of. Life started to feel steady again. I rented a small apartment near Lake Michigan. Got myself a used car just good enough to get to work. I started buying flowers again. Reading on weekends. And occasionally, writing a few journal entries in the leather notebook Martha had given me before I left the church. I didn't think about Ryan anymore. Until he showed up out of nowhere. That day, I was leading a strategy meeting with the design team when I received an email from his old address. The subject line read, "Give me a chance to talk." I didn't respond. But a few days later, I saw him standing outside the office, coffee cup in hand, wrinkled dress shirt, face drawn. He was still tall, still carried himself with that same old confidence. But his eyes, they weren't the eyes of a man in control anymore. They were the eyes of someone who had completely lost his way. "I didn't know where else to find you," he said as I approached. "I heard you worked here. I needed to see you." "For what reason?" I asked. My voice wasn't loud, but it was firm. "Because I was wrong." He swallowed hard. "I haven't been able to sleep. Every morning I wake up thinking about what I did. I lost the only person who believed in me. Before it all collapsed." I looked at him, emotionless. "You say that like you're only sorry because you got caught." He started to say something, but I raised my hand. "I'm not here to listen to confessions. I'm here to live my life." Ryan nodded faintly, his shoulders slumping. Before walking away, he murmured, "I just wish I could do something to make it right." I didn't answer. I didn't need him to fix anything anymore. The past was a lesson and I was no longer a student of it. A week later, I met a woman during a client workshop at the Lakeview Events Center. She introduced herself as Laura, a market analyst currently running an independent consulting group. We struck up a conversation while waiting in line for coffee, and after a few polite exchanges, she tilted her head, studying me. "Serenity?" she asked. "I think I've heard your name before. Didn't you used to work with Ryan Davis?" I didn't deny it. Laura smirked. "He used to be my ex. Almost 6 years ago." I froze. "I married him 5 years ago." Lara nodded, her gaze softening. He got involved with you while he was still keeping in touch with me. I left after finding a string of emails between him and another female employee. Not you, not me. I almost warned you. But I figured, it's hard to believe the truth when you're in love. I couldn't find words. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the ceiling and exhaling slowly. I had once felt devastated for being left behind. But it turned out what I thought was the peak of betrayal was only the tip of a toxic iceberg I had once called home. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just felt calm. And in that calm, I realized I wouldn't get revenge with tears or angry words. I'd get it by living better. With a solid career. A name that people, I would say with respect because of who I was, not who I was with. And I had already started doing it. Every project, every campaign I led was exceeding expectations. Clients didn't just come for Clover, they asked to work with me, by name. I was rebuilding my brand from the ruins Ryan left behind. And I didn't need anyone to lead the way. I was walking forward on my own, and I knew exactly where I was going. It all began with an internal meeting that lasted nearly 3 hours, in the glass-walled conference room on the 7th floor of Clover Creative. Hannah, the strategy team, and I were planning the company's biggest campaign since its founding, a brand repositioning project for a digital wellness platform preparing for its Series B funding round. I was put in charge of all content and the campaign's visual concept. When I heard the name of the project, Authenticity First, I couldn't help but let out a small laugh. Those 2 words felt like an arrow aimed straight at everything I had been through. It took me nearly a week to develop the core idea. Rebuild trust through real stories, real people, real experiences. No more stiff smiles in gym photos or overly edited promotional videos. I proposed a video series that followed people trying to change their lives, people who had failed, who had broken down, but who rose again in their own way. Hannah nodded the moment she saw the draft. I want you to be the one to kick off this video series. I looked at her, surprised. Me? Yes. No one understands what it means to rise from rock bottom better than you do right now. I took a few days to think about it, then said yes. The first shoot took place in a small studio, the lighting soft, no script, no director whispering in my ear. It was just me, the camera, and a quiet voice from behind it asking a simple question. If you could say one thing to the person who once looked down on you, what would it be? I looked straight into the lens. And for the first time, I didn't hold anything back. I would say, thank you. Everyone behind the camera went silent. I continued, thank you for letting me hit the ground. Because that's when I found out how strong I really am. Just a few days after the video was uploaded to the project's official site, it reached over 1 million views. Comments poured in from women of all ages, women who had been betrayed by their husbands, lost their jobs, had to start over. They called me the voice of the forgotten, the face of resilience. The success of the campaign brought a wave of new partnerships to Clover. We signed 3 major contracts in 2 months. Revenue grew by 140%. Investors began to notice my name not just as a creative director, but as a symbol of inspiration. And right at that moment, Ryan showed up again. This time, it was an email from a law firm. The message wasn't exactly a lawsuit, but it was packed with phrases like damaging reputation, impacting professional image, and request for removal or correction of video content. I didn't respond. Clover's legal team handled it all, and they handled it well. I had never mentioned his name, never included any details that could be considered defamatory. Everything I said was true. And it was my truth. The next day, I heard that he had been removed from a state-level technology advisory board. 2 weeks later, 3 major partners ended their deals with the company he had just tried to join. A string of former friends unfollowed him on LinkedIn. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel smug. I simply closed my laptop and made myself a cup of hot tea. That afternoon, Jake stopped by the office with a book for me. He was still working delivery for the old supermarket chain, but he had started taking night classes in information technology. I invited him up, and we had coffee as usual, swapping everyday stories. I never expected Jake to be the one to bring me a missing piece I never even knew I needed. Have you ever heard of Arcadia Tech? He asked, his voice low. I looked up. The startup Ryan used to consult for before he was suspended? Jake nodded. I worked there once. Right after I got clean, a friend helped me get a job in IT support. Ryan was the one who interviewed me. I held my breath. Jake's eyes darkened. I knew he wasn't going to hire me. That's not the part that hurt. But after the interview, I overheard a recording from the break room. Ryan was laughing with a colleague, saying, "Bringing in a junkie is like lighting a match in a gas tank." I didn't say anything. I just pressed my hand to my chest where my heart tightened. Jake went on, "I stayed quiet all these years. But when I saw you on that stage at the conference, heard you talk about rebirth and inner strength, I realized Ryan didn't just tear down one person. He's torn down a lot of people like us, people who only needed a chance." I gently squeezed Jake's hand. "What do you want to do?" I asked softly. Jake shook his head. "Nothing. You're already doing it. And you're doing it beautifully." I looked at him, unable to hide how moved I was. Jake, someone who had hit bottom, once treated like nothing, was now the person giving me strength just by being here. He didn't need to expose anyone. His resilience alone was proof that no one has the right to decide who deserves forgiveness or a second chance. That evening I went home and replayed the first video I made for the campaign. I looked at the woman on the screen, hair neatly tied, eyes deep, voice steady. I saw it clearly, that was me. No longer someone's wife. No longer a victim. No longer the one left on the side of the road. And I whispered to myself, I've returned everything, not with rage but with success. Not with bitterness but with truth. I no longer needed to say thank you for leaving me, because my gratitude was already written into every step I now took with dignity, without bowing my head. The days that followed the Authenticity First campaign passed gently, like a soft melody playing against the usual hustle of the city. I kept working steadily, still walking every morning from my lakefront apartment to the office. On weekends I'd visit the farmer's market, pick up a bunch of dried lavender or some fresh bread to share with my neighbors. Jake continued bringing me little things, sometimes a half-used leather notebook, sometimes a box of tea he found in a vintage shop on the west side of the city. One day I teased him, "Are you planning to move your whole storage room over here?" He just smiled, his eyes crinkling in the sun. "If it fits you, I think you should have it." We kept seeing each other, no schedules, no expectations. Sometimes it was a rainy afternoon and Jake would invite me to the old bookstore, where we'd sit for hours without talking, each of us lost in a book. Some evenings when I was tired, Jake would show up, no long conversations, just sitting quietly on my porch, sipping coffee. I used to think love had to come with grand gestures, poetic words, wild hugs and airports. But I came to realize, for me now, love is when someone's presence makes you feel like you don't have to pretend to be anyone else. One autumn night, we sat together on a bench in the park near the lake. Red leaves gently fell around us. Cool wind brushed against my shoulders. Jake handed me a hot cocoa he'd just picked up. I wrapped my hands around it, letting the warmth sink in. "I used to think," Jake said slowly, "there was no space in this world for someone like me in anything good. But you made me think again." I turned to him. His eyes weren't looking at me but at the quiet lake ahead, but I knew every word was sincere. "I'm not perfect," I said gently. "Neither are you. But maybe, two imperfect people can create something worth trusting." Jake smiled. "Trust is enough." I leaned my head on his shoulder, and I wasn't thinking about what tomorrow would bring. I wasn't measuring risks. I wasn't building walls. I just let myself soften, let myself be still. Love didn't arrive like thunder. It arrived in the steady breathing of someone willing to sit beside you when the whole world has turned away. I still remembered the hollow feeling in my chest when Ryan let go of my hand in the middle of the airport. But now, that memory felt like a faded black and white film, no longer sharp, no longer painful. I hadn't forgotten, but I had stopped hurting. I had learned how to forgive. Not for someone else's peace of mind, but for my own freedom. I forgave Ryan, not to welcome him back, but to release myself from the chains of resentment. I didn't forget the lesson he left behind. That trust must be placed wisely, and no one is worth losing yourself to keep them around. I also learned to forgive myself for loving the wrong person, for sacrificing too much, for letting a man define my worth for far too long. My work at Clover grew busier by the day. I was invited to speak at conferences, to consult for young startups trying to find their unique voice. Every time I stepped onto a stage, I carried no title except my name. I was no longer someone's wife. No longer the woman who'd been left behind. One Monday morning, just as I was getting ready to leave the house, Jake walked into the kitchen holding a brown paper bag. "What's in there?" I asked. Jake looked a bit sheepish. "I found one of my old briefcases. Inside was my old startup plan from way back, before I gave it up because of, well, everything." I opened the bag. Inside was a worn-out draft, some faded charts, densely scribbled notes, and a concept that had real potential. It was a platform designed to connect people in recovery with mental health counselors, job opportunities, shelters, and community support. I looked up at Jake. "You were going to build this?" He nodded. Back then, I didn't think anyone would believe that someone who used to be addicted could build something that helps others stand again. I stayed silent for a moment. Then said slowly, "Well, someone believes now. And I think we should build it." Jake stared at me for a long time, as if trying to confirm whether I meant it or was just being kind. Then he smiled a smile that didn't tremble anymore. "So where do we start?" I smiled back. "With trust. The rest we'll learn as we go." I used to think love would save me. But now I know love isn't a savior. It's a reward. For those who dare to stand back up, who dare to heal, and who dare to love again with a heart that's imperfect but honest. And I was ready. Not to forget the past, but to walk toward the future beside someone who saw me as an equal and held my hand not because I was strong, but because I chose to live true to myself. That morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Soft light filtered through the curtains, casting shadows of the balcony trees on the wooden floor. On the table, my conference badge for the annual Tech Forward event lay neatly beside the cup of tea I had made the night before. This year's event was hosted at the largest convention center in Chicago, gathering over 3,000 guests from tech, media, investment, and innovation sectors. I was invited as the keynote speaker for the session titled "Reinventing Trust in the Digital Era." Ironically, it was the same event Ryan was trying to worm his way back into, clinging to old connections, hoping to salvage some piece of reputation after last year's financial scandal. So I wasn't surprised when I received an anonymous email just days before the event. The message was filled with accusations claiming I had stolen the campaign concept, fabricated my narrative to win media, sympathy, and even used personal connections to secure a speaking slot. Clover handled it quickly. Our legal team released a formal statement rejecting all claims, confirming that the Authenticity First campaign was conducted transparently, with full copyright documentation and valid partner contracts. I didn't say anything. I simply prepared my speech more thoroughly. I didn't need to fight back using the same tactics. I wanted the truth to speak in the most public, unmistakable way possible. When I entered the hall, stage lights reflected off the polished wood floor. The LED screen displayed my name and the line, "Founder Rooted Collective, 2025 Social Innovation Award." I walked slowly onto the stage. In the front row, I caught a glimpse of Ryan seated with a few of his former business partners, arms crossed, face unreadable. He wore a gray suit and a black tie, familiar style, but the arrogance once etched on his face was gone. Standing center stage, I picked up the microphone and opened the first slide. The hall went silent. "I used to be a woman who didn't know who she was except as a shadow next to someone else," I began, my voice calm and steady. "I believed that if I stayed gentle enough, agreeable enough, devoted enough, everything would last." A murmur rippled through the audience. I looked out into the crowd. The spotlight didn't make me flinch. But when that person walked away, I didn't lose everything. I found myself. I led the audience through a journey about rebuilding trust in the digital age, about reclaiming agency, and about reconnecting overlooked communities to systems of support and creativity. I spoke of Rooted Collective's work, our data, our impact, and also about the quiet spaces where healing begins. At the end, I showed a black and white photo, me, sitting alone in the back room of a church last year, face thin, clutching a cup of tea. "This was me," I said. "Before Rooted. Before any award. And if I had to start again from here, I would, because I know now that my value doesn't come from someone else's approval, but from the resilience within. The room erupted in applause. I bowed slightly, stepped off stage, and felt my heart beating slowly, not panicked like my first public speech all those years ago. As I stepped down, Ryan approached, blocking the narrow aisle between two sections of seats. He didn't look cold anymore. His face had softened, almost unsure. "You've really changed," he said quietly. I looked at him for a moment. "Or maybe I've always been this way, you just never really saw it." Ryan stayed silent. "Why?" I asked. "Why send the smear email?" He swallowed hard. "I lost everything. Projects collapsed. Partners pulled out. I thought if you stumbled just once I might have a chance to come back." I nodded, my expression calm. "You wanted me to fall. But I've learned how to fly." I walked past him. Just as I reached the end of the row, he called out behind me. "I'm sorry." I didn't turn around. I just paused, and let the words float gently over my shoulder. An apology can come late. But my choice? It arrived right on time. I kept walking, the lights at the end of the hall casting a long shadow across the white marble floor. My steps were no longer tethered to anyone's silhouette. No longer pulled by hurt. No longer imprisoned by regret. Ryan was still standing there, surrounded by a crowd that was slowly dispersing. He didn't follow, didn't stop me, just watched, his eyes no longer full of pride or resentment. This time, they held only one thing: remorse. But I didn't need him to carry that. I had carried it long enough. And I'd finally set it down. Right here. In this moment. That afternoon, golden sunlight spilled softly across the stone steps of the historic house we'd rented for Rooted Collective's first anniversary celebration. Just a small gathering, no strobe lights, no grand stage, no lavish bouquets or pre-written speeches. We chose this date intentionally. Exactly 1 year ago, I woke up in a freezing train station with no wallet, no phone, no one to call. 1 year. It seemed so long. But in truth, it was just enough time to rebuild a life. I stood in the courtyard, wearing a pale blue linen dress hand-sewn by a friend from the recovery community. Jake stood beside me, sleeves rolled up, still stained with a bit of grease from installing a circuit panel at a new shelter Rooted was helping fund that morning. On my right stood Mrs. Martha, those same kind eyes, whiter hair now, but her back still straight, and her heart still warm enough to make anyone feel welcome in her presence. Hannah from Clover came too, bringing her whole design team. As she hugged me, she whispered, "I used to think you'd only stay here for a while. But now I see you didn't just stay. You built something of your own here." I smiled. I didn't deny it. I had truly been reborn, not to reject the past, but to understand that every pain I went through had its place. There were no formal speeches that evening. I only picked up the microphone as the sky turned soft amber and wayward kites floated against the darkening western sky. I looked around and saw the faces of those I had once met while they were still tear-streaked in the tiny counseling room behind the bookstore. Women who had once trembled as they spoke of being abandoned mid-dinner, in hospital rooms, in the middle of other people's laughter. My voice rang out calm and steady. "I'm not standing here because I'm stronger than anyone else. I'm just someone who didn't stop when the world told me to give up." I saw a young woman wipe her eyes. Another squeezed her friend's hand tightly. "I'm not here to tell you pain goes away quickly. It doesn't. But I do know if you make it through the night, you'll see the first light." I paused. A breeze passed under the eaves, rustling the leaves above. "And when you rise, remember you don't need anyone's permission. You are the proof." Applause followed. Not loud, but steady and warm, like heartbeats reminding each other they were still here. After the gathering, we sat under strings of soft hanging lights for dinner. Everyone brought something they had made themselves. Jake brought chickpea stew he'd learned from his mother. I made walnut and honey bread, using a recipe from a woman in our group who had been a chef before a painful divorce. We told stories. No one asked, no one forced, but everyone wanted to share. When night fell, people began to leave with long, tight hugs. I saw each one off. Mrs. Martha was the last to go. She held my hand and whispered, "You've found yourself again. Now it's time you help others find themselves too." I nodded and hugged her tightly. When it was finally quiet, Jake took my hand without a word. We walked down to the park by the lake. The air was neither cold nor hot, just enough to let two people hold hands and feel every finger interlaced. We stood by the wooden railing, looking out over the water glimmering in the fading light. The evening sun stretched over the small waves, like memories once painful now reflected back as something gentler. Jake gave my hand a light squeeze. "Where do you think we'll go next?" I looked up at the sky, now a deeper shade of orange, and smiled. "Somewhere. There's still room for people who've been forgotten. I don't want to be the last story." He looked at me. That look still calm, still not promising the world. But I knew wherever I chose to go, the person walking with me was already ready. I had once been left on the street. No wallet, no home, no one to hold on to. But here I was, under the sunset of the city that once broke me, standing tall, hand in hand with someone who didn't come to save me, just to walk beside me. And I knew I had truly become the one steering my own life. Not because I'd never fallen, but because I'd chosen to rise, to look back, and to move forward. My story might not mirror anyone else's. But I believe, somewhere within the cracks life leaves behind, someone out there is quietly trying to move on. Maybe you've been abandoned. Maybe you've felt lost in a city where no one knows your name. Maybe the person you trusted most turned their back on you. But if you're still listening to this final moment, maybe that means you're carrying your own wound and your own desire to heal. What do you think of Serenity's journey? A woman once drowned in loneliness and betrayal, yet who found a way to rise again, choosing courage over bitterness. Have you ever felt that it was life's most unexpected moments that finally helped you live more truthfully? Share your thoughts below. Sometimes, one line from you might be the comfort someone else needs to get through their pain. And if you believe there's still room in life for hope, for healing, and for endings more beautiful than beginnings, hit follow. Because there are still so many stories waiting to be told about families torn and mended, about brave mothers, daughters, and wives. And who knows? One day, your story might be the one that gives someone else the strength to begin again.